What is going on, everybody? Today's video, we're gonna try and figure out the shock mounting situation. Off camera, I did a bunch of stuff with 3D modeling and 3D printing some brackets to try and get all the hole placement and angles and everything right. So I'm gonna try and catch you up to speed on that and hopefully get these shocks mounted. Alright, so like I just mentioned, I'm going to try and get you guys caught up. I did a lot of this stuff off camera, like I mentioned in the intro video. I know I'm close enough to be able to figure out what I need to do. I just don't know how far off I am. So what I'm going to try and do is condense these videos down to my final solution for the problem I'm trying to figure out. So like I mentioned, shock mounts, you can see I've kind of been tinkering through some stuff, so we're kind of in. So you can see down there that light blue is my 3D printed bracket, and then I also 3D printed some misalignment shims. So a misalignment shim is something like this, and I'll show you what that does in a second. So I'll show you the benefit of a misalignment shim. So you can see we're not bolted in, but this blue bracket right here, the angle that it's on. And I mentioned in the intro video that the shock mount location on the S550 subframe is 2 inches wider on each side of the car for a total of 4 inches. So the problem I was having, we're going to draw it out, is the control arm comes out, and then there's a bracket right here. On a regular S550 Mustang, the shock would just go up, and it just kind of bolts to the car. Everything's straight and easy, no problem. The problem I have is my car is inboard more, or this is out 2 inches, however you want to look at it. So that might not be the best way to draw it, because the shock goes in this way with the bolt going through it. But kind of comes up at a little bit of an angle. Whoops, I'm trying to draw this while looking through the camera. So this kind of gets sideways. When the car is loaded at normal ride height, everything will be close enough. That's not an issue. The problem is when this control arm lowers, so when the control arm drops down, this bracket is now at this angle, trying to get the shock all the way up to that angle, and you can see we end up having some interference. So I needed to get some misalignment spacers. The lower spherical bearing on the bottom of the MCSs, I ended up pressing this thing out to figure out what it was, and it's some metric size with a 26mm body but a 15mm hole. Normally that would be a COM 12 metric, I believe. So anyways, I was thinking about just pressing in a new spherical bearing, but that would have kind of taken me down a different road. That would have been more of a pain. So my final solution, let me get this shock out of here, kind of show you what we're going to end up doing. Alright, so here's my original lower shock mount. You can see how far offset the hole was, because I didn't want the drive shaft to hit the shock body. So number 2, I fixed it a little bit. We had way too much room on that one. This one put the holes in the proper location. You can see how thick it is. My original idea was to kind of buy a hunk of aluminum and mill it out on my little mini mill right there. But again, the angles ended up being a little bit too much. So then I printed this one out, and you can see how thin it is. So compared to this one, so this is that, if you look at it from the top angle. So what I'm going to do is just kind of cut it out of this 120 wall steel tube, just kind of slice the top off of it, and then there's my bracket, drill my holes, I'm good. So that kind of solved my lower mount issue. And like I was mentioning earlier, you can see all of the spools or spacers. I was 3D printing them out so I could actually kind of do a physical mock-up of them. Then I ended up 3D printing these high misalignment spacers. So So if you end up putting non-misalignment spacers in it, let's see. So you can see we have that much movement before it bottoms out, you know? But if you put the misalignment spacers in it, they allow you that much movement. So what I'm going to have to do is, I couldn't find something that just fits into these, so I was able to buy something close, and then I kind of just need to turn this stainless steel one into this plastic one just by milling it down to the size I need. What we're going to do now is cut down that steel tube into those U-brackets, turn down any of those misalignment spacers, and kind of get these shocks bolted up. Apparently the receipt for this order was stuffed inside the tube I just cut through. I'm about to catch the shop on fire. Alright guys, so here's our bracket. Just about done, obviously not painted. Now what I need to do is make these little misalignments. Now what I need to do is make these little misalignment spacers out of these guys, which I kind of showed earlier. So we're going to put these on the lathe and just kind of turn them down to what we need. Alright guys, so the first one is done. You can see how, you know, close we are right there. Alright guys, so the first one is done. You can see how, you know, oops, gotta straighten it to take it out. You know, trim down kind of how we need it. The outside bit is not trimmed down yet. I want to make sure I kind of get these things fitted first, because that's the tough part. But you can see how much like angularity we get to it. So that's good. Just got to do 3 more. Alright guys, so I've been working on the top, and these were supposed to just drop right in and be able to articulate, but I ended up having to cut them down a little bit. So for me to kind of explain what I'm doing, what we're going to do is kind of draw a side profile of this thing on the board. Alright, so I kind of drew the side profile. So this drops in the center of the spherical bearing, and what happens is these are supposed to line up, and like here's the arc of the ball of the spherical bearing, here's your bottom half, you know, and then there's the you know, the cage or the cup around it. What was happening was these came to me and they were almost like this, so they were a little bit too far out here. So you know, this is the race around it. When this would articulate and try and move, this little corner would contact right here. So what I pretty much did was the misalignment spacer on the mini lathe just kind of cut up into here, cut out that little section. This just dropped in that little bit more, everything lined up, and you know, we're able to kind of get that, you know, get those few extra degrees of rotation just to kind of make everything work. Hope that kind of made sense. So now that right here you can see, whoops, the bottom one might fall out on me. Yep. So now that I got these lined up perfectly, before we would kind of be locked right when it would touch, say right about there, but now we can end up going all the way over. Alright guys, so here's what I've been fighting for. You can see how that angle looks, how close everything is. We have, I don't know, about a ½ inch or so between the drive shaft and the shock body. The angle on it honestly isn't too bad. So that's kind of good. And then fighting for these ones up here to kind of all work out. Yeah, so I'm going to cycle it through its motion. I'll put this, I took a measurement. This 15 3/4 was from this old mark to the center, so that way I can kind of just lift this up, know when this is kind of going to be around normal ride height, and kind of double check everything. Alright guys, so bear with me for a second, but as you can see, there's that, I don't know if this light helps, but that stud right there. To remedy this little stud situation, I ended up having to do this. So I took one of the studs out. So this one, for example, would be here. I'm gonna have to, once this is on, oh geez, put this stud in from the underside because this body is threaded. And then I could actually kind of get away without even putting a nut on it, which would be kind of nice. Alright guys, so we're still dealing with some very fine-tuned fitment issues. You can see how close the spacer is right here to the upper shock mount body. The strut is fully compressed, so it's about as much of an angle as we'll see. But what I'm going to do is take a little diameter off of this spacer, and I got to turn it down because I also need to fit a lock nut on top of this and still be able to turn the adjustment knobs up here. Alright, so after turning down that spacer, it might be really hard to see, like right in here, the space we have, but you can see we shortened it, so now we can get both of our nuts on. And I checked the the compression rebound adjusting knob, and that works fine with this setup. So that was kind of the last spacer we needed to figure out. So the other thing is, you can see the shock body is pretty much all the way up against this bump stop. It could go up a tiny bit more, but if you remember from earlier, this line right here, 15 3/4, was from this line to what would be the center of the wheel at ride height. So that way all I can do is just jack this up, figure out how much wheel travel we get to know we kind of have like enough. So we're up right now like 3.5 inches, which is plenty because our diffuser and our flat floor is about 3.5 inches. So I might actually, I know I've mentioned in the past using hard bump stops or shock shims because I want the car to kind of take a set, but the amount of downforce this car has, I want it to just kind of get there and stay there. So we got plenty of bump travel, no binding. I think we're kind of finally about to wrap up this whole shock mount part of this project. Alright, so I just got done turning all of the spools that I need. What I did was, once I got the one side kind of done and all figured out, the passenger side I just went ahead and made everything. Hopefully everything will just bolt right up, but basically all of this are like the little spools and spacers and everything that I needed to make. The finished, ready to go well, minus paint and everything obviously, but so we had to make these two down here that allow us to get that adjustment. Keep in mind, it's only going to be at that extreme angle when the suspension droops like all the way, pretty much only when I'm going to be like lifting the car or changing tires. The upper was where kind of all the issues were. Not really issues, I just had to figure out what would work or not. So here's the Maximum Motorsports upper mount. You can see I took the one stud out because in the car, obviously I probably mentioned a couple times, the shock leans out and actually like back towards us a little bit. So this stud will be put in that way and the nut will actually be on the top. That stud was cut. These two are untouched. And you can see we get good articulation, enough room for the jam nuts, and the upper adjustment knob works. So I think I'm going to end this one here because from this point it's just bolting everything on. If there's a follow-up scene, that means something went wrong and I kind of had to tinker with it more. But for the most part, this video was just figuring out all these mounts and shims and spools and all that stuff so everything can work at the angles that it needs to. From this point, I think the next video, I actually want to get it on its own weight because I need to figure out what I want to do with a fuel cell. I think that might be the next big project. Brakes are relatively easy. I gotta order a drive shaft. Ooh, I gotta do flares on this thing. I'm gonna do custom one-off carbon fiber flares. We're also gonna be doing a bunch of UPR bits. We got their toe links, vertical links, spherical solid bushings. So they were awesome enough to reach out when they heard I was swapping this rear into this car and said, hey, you know, any parts for the rear, you know, let us know. So they sent us a whole bunch of stuff, so thank you to UPR. So yeah, obviously we got a ton of projects coming up on this thing. We're gonna video all of it. If you want to keep up to date on everything, please hit that subscribe button down below. Please give it a thumbs up, really helps us out. As always guys, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next one.